See they know the truth and
Please consider supporting us by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Your support will be greatly appreciated.
Chapter 14. Organizing a Race for Action. Just as it is in the case of Africa and black people everywhere, the central problem of over 30 million blacks in the United States is unity. Nothing will ever be achieved by such a minority group in white America, nothing that leads to real adjustment for progress, until a powerful unity movement among blacks develops throughout the United States. This must be done to achieve full recognition even as men and women, not to mention full citizenship. As a larger and larger measure of nationwide unity is achieved, the next two steps should be in the direction of charting a practical line of advance and of action, once the courses of action are carefully and sensibly planned. The picture of several thousand black organizations, each independent and vying for leadership, is substantially the same picture of fragmentation and disunity in Africa that led to the downfall of the whole race. We have also seen that in the earliest times very often all that was involved was somebody wanted to be the head, was not getting there fast enough, and therefore organized his own little state. Most of them perished, picked off one by one. The same thing will happen to any black organizations, standing alone, that disturb the white mind. The obstacles to unity are so great that the outlook is both discouraging and frightening to all but the strong with the will to both survive and overcome. The very first major obstacle to be overcome involves a mental revolution out of which black America faces up to the stark reality that white America as a whole is its enemy, that blacks will be recognized only in a subordinate role, that the scattering of black office holders, high and low, really means nothing to the race as a whole, that there are actually two sets of laws as administered, one for whites and one for blacks, just as there are two sets of wages and prices, and finally, that blacks' loyalty and devotion to the whites, in spite of all they have done and still do against them, mystifies the whites themselves and confirms anew their belief that such humble dog attitudes indicate inferiority independently of everything else. Until black Americans are quite clear in their own minds about the real situation in this country, all talk about unity and achieving equal justice will be just that, useless talk. But with a clear understanding of reality, the specific studies and planning for a broad program for securing racial unity and progress can begin. No one would propose that 30 million blacks be brought under a single umbrella of leadership. Nor is that necessary. But an organizing national conference should develop a program designed to form hundreds of organizations into one vast national body of millions, with each society carrying on its own functions as before, except in matters concerning the whole race, or organized by families and individuals, community by community, and state by state. Where the matter concerns the whole race, affiliated groups would speak in one voice through the overall organization of the race. But since the overall race organization will be directly involved in promoting definite action programs on all fronts, the members of all affiliated groups will also be members of the overall race organization. The separatist movement of whites gave Negro integrationists another shock, showing them how utterly dependent they had been on white enterprise for just about everything, even in all-black neighborhoods before the whites left their own exclusive sections. But the shock did not affect their dependent mentality. In an all-black community of 100,000 people, there were only 3 black-owned grocery stores, and very small ones at that, compared with 75 white-operated stores. Not a single black-owned hardware store, 7 white, or laundry, 15 white-owned laundromats, etc. In a city of nearly 1 million blacks, there is not a single black-owned department store or any other important enterprise. We have left it all to the whites, just as though they alone can create jobs and job opportunities. The perpetual hat-in-hand cry of poverty must end. What we have too much of is the poverty of spirit. Nor will the lack of finance alibi stand. For in spite of our lower incomes, we waste millions in luxuries. What we lack is the chain store vision and the enterprising spirit that organizes groups fully able to launch large-scale community-financed undertakings. The white withdrawal created citywide black communities. Most of the first-class services went to the suburbs. The blacks must now fill the gaps on all front, must prove their worth. The time for big talking is over. The time for big action is here. That is why a nationwide movement for unity in one vast organization of millions is the road to constructive action through the various black communities of the country. Wanted: all prisoners to enlist. Organizing the race for action must include a carefully developed plan for tapping and drawing on some unused and rejected sources of strength. These are our prisoners and former prisoners. For among the many problems which the blacks themselves must solve is crime, and primarily because almost all crimes committed by blacks are against blacks, not whites. There must be some program of action in sheer self-defense. Both crime and the fears for safety it breeds will begin to disappear in the black community only when some such programs for unity, for opportunities, and for public education as outlined in this work gets underway. These offenders do not know that they are enlisted in the white man's army to slowly destroy the race. The war takes many unsuspecting forms, including the big and increasingly widespread use of narcotics among blacks, and an armed surrounding suburbia, trained by sportsman gun and target clubs, nationwide task forces, specially trained for inner-city operations. The list goes on and on. The community must be made safe for people to live and work there happily and without fears for themselves or their children. Therefore, the blacks themselves must have a program. Here is where community control, about which we hear so much, should begin. The first anti-crime steps might be widespread information, which is education, about the true meaning of blacks' crimes almost exclusively against blacks, and, secondly, the community development plans that are designed to create more opportunities for all. There are other possible programs that could radically reduce crimes, programs short of the final step. For if all else fails, the community, each community, should open an all-out war along lines determined by the community. No such final course will be necessary, however, if the black community becomes a truly functioning community in fact. For then there would be so much work to be done in an overall race movement that the so-called criminal, in jail or out, would have a society not only to return to, but one that welcomes him warmly and needs him or her urgently. As things now stand, all this talk about returning to society is sheer idiocy. What society? The only society I know about is as criminal and oppressive outside of the penal institutions as are its representatives inside of them. The big difference is only in the bigness of society in general, the bigness of crime off the street and up in high places, and the bigness of the hostility to and rejection of the men coming out of the prisons by the very same society to which they are expected to return and adjust. We are, whether we realize it or not, imprisoned inseparably with our confined prisoners, ex-prisoners, and those who are headed for places behind walls. We are together. Who is going to be murdered then? Raped? Robbed? The whites? Of course not, and for several clear-cut reasons. The firsts may not seem obvious, but blacks who so readily make criminal attacks on their own people are, unconsciously, striking out against the unbearable situation of what appears to be permanent disunity and, therefore, the utter helplessness of a race whose liberation from oppression can be achieved only by united initiatives of its own. They, the so-called criminals, and their youthful followers expect nothing beneficial from the white world and see no reason for hope in their own. Hence, like caged animals, they strike at what is nearest to them, their own people. They are actually trying to kill a situation they hate, unaware that even in this they are serving the white man well. For the whites need not go all out for genocide schemes for which they are often charged when blacks are killing themselves off daily on such a large scale. This brings us directly to the second reason why most crimes by blacks are against blacks and not, as even the whites would expect, against whites. The unequal justice system of white America encourages blacks to commit crimes against blacks and even rewards them with lighter sentences if convicted. Black life is cheap. Black womanhood is not honored. One may destroy either with both ease and relative protection. All this could be radically changed by a nationwide organization of the race with a new outlook program of a new kind of educational system, training when needed, and above all, enterprises as a job-creating system, the very first moves toward the creation of the kind of society that will give both pride and inspiration to black youth, and the kind of society that will have positive alternatives to crimes, and one to which every prisoner can return with hope. In such a society, the very expression ex-con or ex-anything else would be rigorously banned. This would be part of the new education about which I have spoken. All talk about reform and rehabilitation is just so much nonsense until society itself is reformed, for you can never rehabilitate men and women who have never been habilitated in the first place. You can never reform those who have never been allowed to be formed. Black society still has the spiritual qualities for the task. What is needed now is an honest and unselfish collective leadership. I have gone into some details in both outlining the most disturbing spots cast by the darkening shadows of history and also trying to pinpoint what the possible signs of promise are. For the black world, history's watchmen could see no signs of promise, no sign of hope outside of a position of strength which unity alone can provide. But there will never be real unity without a plan and a program to sustain it. Petty power struggles, bickering, and attacking each other are all signs of a death wish as a race. Which way then, you still enshackled blacks? 6,000 years of their history has answered, unite or perish. The tragedy that bloodied the pages in every period of their history because of disunity should be warning enough for the blacks of Africa, the Caribbeans, and elsewhere. But, being the one people who are generally ignorant of their history, it may well be that many will not see unity as a question of life or death. However, there has been so much history during the time of those now living that the precarious situation of the black race should be obvious to all. Only a largely united people can successfully confront oppressors and, without praying on bended knees or even pleading, secure the removal of all shackling chains. The choice is between unity of action in calm, careful thinking and planning the courses of action through one vast organization of millions, either this or ultimate damnation. If the race is incapable of unity, it is incapable of survival as a free and equal people and will deserve all the iniquities imposed upon it, for it will have proved beyond all question that it is indeed unfit to survive as a people free and equal in every respect whatsoever with the other peoples of the earth. What is proposed here is a moratorium on feudal rhetoric and the beginning of real racial unity through an action program never attempted before. Therefore, black leadership obstacles will still be with us, and for the same ancient reasons. A mass organization expressly planned to enrich the lives of the people on all fronts and directly through the people's ownership of and profit sharing in all economic enterprises. This will be too much for many leaders to adopt, except in principle. And any such all-Africa race movement in the United States will certainly be bitterly opposed by all Negro integrationists because no whites would be in it. This, in their skewed minds, means black separatism. Black separatists? Who are they? The simple truth is that the African people in the United States and throughout the world are not, and never have been, separatists in fact. Perhaps this has been their weakness. They never really hated the whites, and they do not really hate the whites now. What is taken for hatred when applied to blacks is their reaction against being hated, rejected, and oppressed. And the thinking whites know this very well. When they cry racism in reverse, or reverse discrimination and reverse segregation, they are saying, in fact, that only we whites may be racists. Only we whites may discriminate or segregate, but not you blacks. All white organizations that exclude blacks everywhere are normal and proper from the white perspective, but an all-black organization excluding whites, perish the thought. Whites flee en masse from cities throughout the nation to avoid integrated schools and fair housing laws. These are the real separatists, not the blacks who never fled from the whites at all. Yet those blacks who said, "Let them go, let us not pursue them. Let us stay where we are, stand on our own feet as men and women, and begin to build and improve our own schools and communities," these, not the whites, are denounced as separatists or black nationalists. The question which blacks must answer and act on, or remain forever exactly where they are, is how can a minority group in a situation distinctly different from that of any other minority successfully live and develop happily in an overwhelmingly white society? This is the question that faces us squarely in the critical times at the crossroads, and the decision must be taken as a race and by the race rather than by self-appointed leaders. The term crossroads here must be taken more seriously than a mere metaphor. For a people may reach that intersection in life where the routes cross, leading in different directions. We only know the road over which we have just come. So at the crossroads, we must pause, uncertain. Which way now? Which way should we go? The numerous movements, led by charismatic leaders with catchy slogans to shout, are roads many will take. The biggest crowd-drawing route will always be baited with some kind of religion, led by some prophet or mystic. For religion, any kind of religion, has been the means by which hope was maintained by a people without any basis for hope. And the search for real leaders has always been so desperate that the people flock to this or that promoter's movement, hoping that a true leader has been found at last. The personal wealth amassed by these leaders is a matter of pride for many of their followers. To the poor and ignorant who are being fleeced, even the palatial mansion with colorfully uniformed servants reflect the power and glory of their leader. Criticism is silenced. For these leaders are shrewd, natural psychologists. They know exactly what appeals to the deprived masses, what will give them a feeling of being somebody and uplifted. Thousands will continue to be exploited by the smarter ones who know all the tricks that stir the emotion in empty pocketbooks. And, apparently, these countless thousands of faithful followers like it. There are several big organizations, each concerned with different aspects of the racial situation, which carry on successful and much-needed work in the respective fields. Some were on the battlefront for the race when no one else was there. Without them, the situation of blacks in America would be far worse than it is. If we henceforth advance at all, no matter in what direction or how different, it will be from the foundations the best of these organizations have already laid. How long the black race will stand at the crossroads, uncertain what to do, confused, and in fact actually afraid, how long only future history will tell. But one thing is certain, there is a way out. There is an open, untried road. That untried road to actual unity and the actual improvement of the lives of the black masses everywhere is exactly what is proposed in these pages, proposed in clear, concrete, and specific terms. The direction of civilization. Since, by the actual nature of things, racism will never be wished away, the human race could escape the predicted general war between the races and reach a real state of civilization at last through a symbiotic society. There would be no pretense of love and brotherhood, which did not exist in fact. The fierce and increasing battles of whites against integration illustrate the point most clearly. And this is why people of the African race will have to accept the harsh fact that they are rejected by the whites, back up, and begin to reorganize for a position of power that commands respect, not love, and one that will, therefore, bring about the kind of cooperation and opportunities that eventuate in real equality and equal justice. Equality simply means the removal of every barrier that prevents a human being from realizing his fullest potential. To achieve the goal of survival and self-action progress, the blacks do not have to withdraw anywhere to form a separatist society, for the whites themselves have created an even more completely black separatist society in their mad flights to the suburbs. Here we have all that is meant by symbiosis before our very eyes, living, concrete, and almost complete. For having thus withdrawn to make our own separatist community more complete, the whites must not be allowed to perpetuate the lower status of blacks by also controlling and dominating the black community from which they fled. But this will mean something far more than the black people's fragmented programs of the 1960s, marching demonstrations, singing, praying in public squares, shouting protests and slogans, or even the frantic screams of "Burn, baby, burn." Self-destroying, uncontrolled, emotional outbursts must be checked precisely because they becloud the mind, make you just the easy targets the enemy is waiting for, and thereby prevent the kind of deliberate and national thinking and planning that can not only defend and advance the lift of the community, but can help civilization itself to survive. Now it may well be that the perceptive whites will be quick to see, probably even before blacks, that my reference to them as the traditional enemy of the race is not at all a call for increased hatred, tensions, and endless conflicts between the races. For those whites who have read even the high points of the record presented in this work will see with no trouble at all that I have singled out the exact routes to the kind of organized power and influence which will engage a subordinated people in self-improving activities that demonstrate visibly their equality as men and women throughout the world. The perceptive whites will also see quickly enough that reference to them as enemies of the race will be a threat to their absolute supremacy only if it causes the blacks to wake up, begin to realize how fragile is the basis for their present faith in the ultimate justice of the white man, and begin to unite to plan a different course, something they have never done before. Above all, they can see the great difference between the powerful force of a massive body organized on such a scale that it will actually represent the voice and will of the blacks in America and the relative powerlessness of individual organizations and black capitalist groups, important and desirable as each may be in itself. For they know that the real economic and political power in the United States is silently exercised by the thoroughly organized giant corporations which, supported and financed by the tax-paying public with government grants and subsidies, operate realistic socialism at the top. How was all this power achieved? This is the important question here. Study their steps to unity and be amazed, because no matter how diverse and competitive the giant corporations were, they formed, step by step, the most thoroughgoing system of overall unity in the world. At the summit of world corporate power, it's neither private nor free enterprise. Small business enterprises are indeed private, but they are free only in imagination. They are the dependent satellites of the all-powerful interlocking corporations and conglomerates. This quiet capitalistic socialism is interesting to study and compare with the openly proclaimed Marxist or state socialism. If we ignore the ideological principles and slogans that influence the masses, all appear as actually anti-people and therefore anti-civilization. The main thrust of civilization, like religion itself, was toward a more humane society, piloted and guided by the upward march of the human spirit as man slowly advanced from beasthood to a higher and higher level of humankind. Blessed with a mind that enabled him to think, analyze, discover, and invent, he could now evolve education and promote the development of science and technology to further the advance of the whole human species. The medium of exchange, which in relatively recent times became money, was expanded to facilitate the spread of necessities of life for the common welfare. But somewhere back through the years, the whole upward trend was reversed as aggression inspired by greed led to the easy acquisition of both wealth and political power by the daring few at the expense of the many. Mass poverty and the ignorance and disease which are its inseparable companions spread as the wealth belonging to all the people came to be owned or controlled by the few in every country, no matter what system or ideology it claimed. This is not the direction civilization is supposed to take. We have what should be its reflection. Advances in science, technology, great skyscraper cities, skies filled with aircraft, moon flights, improvements in everything but man himself, his murderous, greedy soul being still ages back there in the caves of his ancestors. For the blacks, who are the most victimized everywhere, their own situation can be radically changed in a program that regards money as the only means by which they can do the things that must be done through cooperation. For the kind of new cooperative organization we have been discussing will be different from those now existing in fundamental aims and objectives. The concept here is cooperation as the humane law of life, total and actual unity, brotherhood and sisterhood throughout the organization, and not just economic cooperatives, such as stores, markets, housings, farms, etc. Important as these will be. And we say this united movement toward a more humane economic system in the midst of a dog-eat-dog, money-mad competitive society will be a movement in the direction of real civilization. The challenging question is whether blacks of the 20th century can recover enough of the vision, strength, and will of their forefathers who built the Great Pyramids to undertake the tasks of this present. The liberation of our minds. This is task number 1. It will not be easy, and it will not be easily achieved in a single generation. The reasons have already been rather clearly set forth. The present-day confused outlook of the African people is the result of centuries of Caucasian acculturation, a quite natural process wherever one people come under the economic, political, and social domination of another people. The ideologies and value system of the oppressors quite unconsciously become those of the oppressed, even when the result is demonstratively against themselves. But all the other oppressed peoples, whether Indian, Chinese, or Japanese, were able to hold on doggedly to their own racial pride and cultural heritage as the last resource for survival as a people. Unlike the blacks, they were never completely cut off from this sustaining lifeline of every people. In order to clear away some of the confusing cobwebs from our minds, we may be helped by rethinking through the following propositions. 1. Black Americans en masse are not going to emigrate to Africa or anywhere else. This is a fact equally true of all large black populations elsewhere outside of Africa. The real spirit of racial identity with the land and our forefathers, and a real Pan-Africanism will emerge only in those black population areas which, through their own unified development programs, have reached a level of strength that enables them to maintain a permanent system of exchange in visits, goods, and services with the motherland and other areas. 2. Nobody is going to destroy the American system, and nobody is going to destroy either capitalism or communism. There will be no attempt here to go into detailed analysis to demonstrate why neither capitalism nor communism can be acceptable wholly by African people. Draw on any beneficial elements in each? Yes. Accept either one as our total system? No. Those who have been so brainwashed into ideological blindness that they cannot see that the actual political, economic, and social structures of capitalism and communism are substantially the same upper ruling classes, same elite classes, and the same controlled and exploited masses, those unable to see this operating over the world before their very eyes will, of course, be unable to see what is presented here. 3. Since most blacks live within what is essentially a capitalist system, when they face up to the fact that neither they nor any other shouting group are going to destroy the system, then they will be in a position to plan how to deal with the system. They not only need to wholly accept it, but they should reject black capitalism as a solution of the economic bondage problems of the masses, for it must certainly be clear by now that my whole focus is on a system that directly benefits the people lower down, the great common people, and not just the further enrichment of the blacks who are already well off and far ahead. And Africans in a capitalist state have the freedom to organize and do for themselves things they would never be allowed to do in any communist state. This all-important fact must be acknowledged even by the bitter enemies of the system, simply because it is a fact. From this fact comes the opportunity for blacks to unite and develop a more humane economic system of a new kind of community cooperatives, owned and controlled by the people in each community. 4. The white man as an enemy of the blacks will become less and less a fact, and his hostile or contemptuous attitude will change to more and more respect if and when this race begins to move forward on 3 fronts. A. The first is the kind of massive organization, the very existence of which means the presence of an organized power to be reckoned with. B. The second is a nationwide economic development program, promoted by the unified race organization as enterprises of a united people, and distinguished from those of private individuals and corporations. The aims would be the creation of career and general employment opportunities, a national foundation, and central banking system to maintain and safeguard financial resources required to carry on the work of the race, and without which we can only remain a pleading and begging people. C. Political action. There is no question about better race relations developing as more and more members of the race register and vote, and the number of black officials elected to office increases. The recent notable increase in the number of black elected officials in the United States, be it remembered, resulted almost entirely from the existence of predominantly black communities after the whites had withdrawn to the suburbs. The bitter irony in this situation is that thousands of Negro integrationists quickly took advantage of this concentration of black political power to be elected to local, state, and national offices, Congress. If their program to break up all black communities and scatter-site the people among the whites had succeeded, they would have never been elected to office. The few well-known exceptions do not change the picture. Yet the great focus of today's black leaders, young and old, is on politics. That's understandable, for we are still in the talking stage, and politics is a profession of talkers. The drive to increase the black vote should go on. The election of blacks to office should be accelerated. Still, the central questions will demand answers sooner or later. What kind of persons are we electing? After the politicians are elected to the various offices, who, besides themselves, actually benefit from all the campaigning and voting? How much real difference would it make in the situation of blacks in this country if we elected 15 U.S. senators, 100 congressmen, 5,000 state legislators, mayors, etc.? For what is well known is that some black officials, once elected to office, turn out to be as conservative and reactionary as any congressman from the backwoods of Mississippi. Yet politics are too important to be left forever in present situations. Blacks need more political education on how to choose whom, or evaluating guidelines above the prevailing gift of gab. The respect of the whites, which was the point of this departure, in the realm of politics may be very superficial indeed and tentative. Here he is, seeking the black vote, seeking help in securing a better job and a better position of political power. Black political power can support, but never replace, an organized economic power system within the race itself that gives it the resources to do what has to be done, the only move that will command the respect for blacks as a people throughout the world. 5. The fifth barrier to the liberation of our minds would have to be set forth first if we were proceeding in the order of importance or difficulty. For it is, perhaps, the most tragic and formidable. That mental blockage of total liberation developed from the way religion has been used to capture, enslave, and exploit the black people of the world for over 1,000 years. For the African people are, and always have been, a very religious and highly spiritual people. But we were also a religiously gullible people, believing that the religion of the foreigners and their belief in one supreme God, though called by different names, were essentially the same as our own. And this was right. What the blacks did not know, however, was that while both Christianity and Islam were in themselves great and acceptable faiths, they were being used by men whose main purposes were conquest and enslavement in pursuit of economic and political power. The whole continent of Africa was taken over, its wealth exploited, and its people dehumanized through enslavement, all in the name of Jesus Christ, Allah, and civilization. Their success is always assured because, when the spotlights of history are turned on and reveal that those conquest aims were for political domination and economic exploitation under the cover of religion, they scream that their religion itself is under attack, and their faithful followers believe it. Thus, the great religions of both Islam and Christianity have been disgraced by evil men with blood-curdling cries of jihad or holy war against black unbelievers, pagans, or the Christian missions of civilization that rationalized European conquests. The future task before black Muslims and black Christians is distinguishing their true religion from how evil men have used it to serve their own non-religious purposes. This writer, for example, is a devout Christian, but that fact does not blind him to the chains of bondage hammered on his race in the name of Christianity, or cause him to try and gloss over or soften the records of history when his own religion is unfavorably exposed. 6. To escape at last from our mental house of bondage, we must see this color-crazy world in a clearer perspective, for color-crazy it is. We should begin by drawing a vast African circle of honor around all those millions of Africans of mixed blood, often referred to as mulattoes, who from the earliest times to the present have stood steadfast and loyally identified with the race of their originally black mothers. They deserve special honor because they did not have to do so when amalgamation of the races spread over Egypt and the Arabic world. And they had compelling reasons for not being identified with black-skinned Africans. For they were classified as white and therefore not subject to enslavement. This fact is of the greatest importance in understanding the history of this race, for if skipped over, as it always has been, that history will remain confused. Therefore, we have pointed out that when the general enslavement of whites and mulattoes ended and slavery was confined to those with black skins, the color of black itself became the trademark of slavery, and therefore, anathema, evil, and the worst that could happen to a human being was to be born black. And this is why we have drawn an African circle of honor around those of mixed blood who, in spite of all of this, even through the most frightful centuries, split off from their pro-white and anti-black brothers and sisters to remain with the unfortunate blacks. Where the future of an entire race is concerned, the importance of being fully aware of the great difference in racial attitude that has always existed among those of mixed blood should be self-evident. The course of that future will be determined by a growing mass of intelligence and alertness, which enables people to use quite different criteria in the search for honest and reliable leaders. At present, our mental laziness permits any smooth and fast talker to assume leadership. Just knowing about anti-black mulattoes will not remove the need to know what each individual stands for. Color is no guide, for the blackest of the blacks may be an arch traitor. The best route emerges before the eyes in every race-wide situation. A race-wide organization, in this case to provide mass education in the homes, the kind of community-wide information that will enable a people to choose dedicated and competent leaders and other essential workers, and ferret out the exploiters who worm their way into key offices which enable them, as representatives of the white man, to defeat or check any organized all-black efforts to advance. 7. In view of the facts already set forth, it should not be surprising why so many American Negroes are identifying themselves with the Arabic Middle East or Asia rather than Africa. The fact that in the United States, all Africans and persons with any discernible African blood were legally classified as Negroes made a most important difference and contrasted sharply with other parts of the world where mulattoes are either classified as white or given the legal status of a separate ethnic group with a privileged status above those with dark or black complexion. Even mulattoes arriving from some of the West Indian islands are often shocked to find the American practice of classifying all of them as Negroes. They resent it, and many will not live in the United States for this reason. By contrast, the anti-black mulattoes in the United States, while resenting the indiscriminate grouping also, have accepted both Negro and colored as proper names, and black, tentatively for strategic leadership reasons, have sought a breakthrough by spearheading drives for integration, forced busing for racial balance, and scatter-site housing in white suburbia. Most important, during the past 20 years, increased travel enabled them to learn with certainty that mulattoes are indeed considered white throughout the Muslim Middle East and Muslim North Africa, Egypt, Algeria, Tunis, Morocco, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and the Holy Land of Islam, Saudi Arabia. Now, anyone who is even moderately acquainted with the history of the Arab slave trade for the past 2,000 years would know that, as a result, there are not only millions of mulattoes throughout the Arab states, but countless thousands of jet-black Africans whose ancestors were born there also. All speak Arabic, are Muslims, and consider themselves Arabs for exactly the same reason, as emphasized before, that blacks born in the United States consider themselves Americans. One can very readily understand why those Negroes who wish to escape black or African identity are pushing for an identity of color with their kind in those countries where they are white and therefore in a class distinctly superior to the still enslaved or subordinated blacks still living there. And they have every right, natural and otherwise, to follow their own inclinations. Indeed, the race would experience the joyful relief that comes with a new birth of freedom if this particular group would stop trying to operate in both the white and black worlds, stop straddling the fence, and get down decisively on the side of its choice. They will never do this, of course, because they enjoy the same double advantage of a most famous ancestor, Leo Africanus, who, when pressed in Rome to say whether he considered himself African or white, replied that he shifted to whatever side it was expedient to be on from time to time. When the Africans are on top, I'm an African, he said. This class of mixed bloods will always be an embarrassing threat to the other millions who, although also of mixed blood, are wholly African in spirit and pride. These latter are the Adam Clayton Powells of the race, who are not only above suspicion, but are regarded by the black masses as inseparably their own. That a little learning is a dangerous thing is also indicated among the relatively few who preach about the Jews being a black people, Joseph and Mary being black and Jesus Christ also black, etc. A group of American Negroes recently went to Israel, claiming that they were the original Jews, the lost tribe of Israel, and that, therefore, the country belonged to them. Movements of this kind would not deserve even a sentence here if they were not indicative of the frustrations and confusion, and the frantic pulling in different directions which further bind the race in chains difficult to break. They are mental chains as well as blinders. Now, the confusion about black Jews derives from the same historic developments which have been explained about white and black Arabs, exactly the same. For we have shown that the Jews were in Africa from the earliest times, and that Africans were in Palestine from the earliest times. And just as the Jews ruled in African Egypt for several centuries, so also the Africans ruled over Palestine for several centuries. But, unlike the Arabs, the Jews never engaged in the general enslavement of blacks. In cases of warfare, either side might capture segments of the population to be marched off to work in the victorious nation, a notable instance being the Jewish captivity in Egypt and their later emancipation and return under the leadership of Moses. Not only did many colored Jews cross the Red Sea with Moses, but doubtless many converted jet-black Jews such as the wife of the lawgiver himself. Furthermore, as in the case of the Arabs, we often confuse race with religion. The people we call Jews indiscriminately are Hebrews by race and Jews by religion. Anyone can be a Jew, but not a Hebrew. The Hebrews and the Arabs are both white Semitic peoples, and no number of offsprings by non-Hebrews and non-Arabs or adherents to either religion will ever change this absolute fact. After all those centuries of racial mixing, there was nothing unusual about the appearance of great colored leaders in Palestine or anywhere else in Asia, including from time to time their rise to kingship in Israel, Syria, Aram, Mesopotamia, etc. But the white Jews, Hebrews, and the white Arabs remain exactly what they always were, white. And this is why, and who pretends not to know it, that there is a racial crisis today in Israel between the ruling white Jews and the colored Jews who have migrated there from the above-mentioned lands. These are the colored adherents of Judaism from Arab countries, but who never became Muslims. It would be going overboard to drown if we follow fanatics in attempting to black eyes everything and everybody that suit their fancy. It is quite useless and unnecessary to try to make either Jesus Christ or the Prophet Muhammad black or even colored. However, the most important point to be noted in reference to the American Negro group, the Lost Tribe of Israel, which landed there only to be rejected, is that it illustrates dramatically all that has been presented in these pages about those groups within the African race that are trying hard to escape from it, seeking their identity with a white people, any white people. And as we have said, let them go. The only thing we object to, and will fight to the end, is the attempt to program the whole race again on a march away from itself, or allow them to remain as leaders of the same people from which they wish to flee. 8. Finally, another major obstacle to unity and progress that is hardly ever openly discussed must not only be discussed, but attacked in a nationwide program in the home. Obviously, only a massive nationwide organization can deal successfully with any of our massive problems. This one concerns an inheritance from slavery. It is the attitude of indifference and disrespect of blacks towards blacks. To the average black, another black is not as important as anyone, of another race. Therefore, black clerks or salespersons will serve whites more quickly and politely than they will serve members of their own race. This evil spirit from slavery pervades all classes, whether lawyers, carpenters, doctors, painters, nurses, shop owners, school heads, teachers, repairmen, garbage and trash men, paper hangers, taxi drivers, movers and haulers, employees in homes, et al. The only thing you can count on being first class are the charges, which are often higher than what the whites pay for the services these same blacks give at the highest level of their competence. The exceptions to this general rule are not enough to affect such a damaging situation. This is why, in proposing specific steps in organizing a whole people, emphasis is placed on training at the very outset for all persons involved directly in the work. For the great task of developing real mutual respect must be undertaken by people who have it themselves. We are no longer interested in the often hypocritical rhetoric of brothers and sisters. Too often, brothers and sisters are mouthed by some with the biggest afro bush while mugging, raping, or killing these same brothers and sisters. Out of this general attitude, which serves the white supremacy position so well, develops an indifference to high standards of excellence in all black situations, the idea that efficiency and expertise are unnecessary in all black situations, and that strict business methods in the areas of auditing, accounting, or strict financial procedures in the collection, deposit, and management of other people's money, these safeguards are thought by many to have no place in the black community. Here we have a contradictory mental twist among blacks. For while distrust of one another is characteristic, when it comes to the thousands of do-good organizations into which we pour millions of dollars, the idea is that one should trust the brothers and sisters who collect, hold, and control the people's money. Re-education will be required for the two mandatory changes in attitude, one towards each other in terms of mutual respect, and the other, a change in attitude about efficiency, expertise in business management, and financial responsibility in administration. Unless we begin to develop and expand these first, A great survival movement will fail just as many other noble efforts failed because the rush neglected the necessary foundation.
See, they know the truth and
Please
fall.
consider supporting us by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Your support will be greatly appreciated.